The best way to describe this episode of Swamp Thing is to make a comparison. You know, when you're reading, like, if you're someone who reads like thriller or horror novels, there will be chapters or scenes in the novel that have a lot of action or intense, moments, right? That are more thrilling. But in between these, more exciting action packed, chapters, there are chapters that are slower that kind of have to link things together. They serve two purposes. One, they show the aftermath and characters dealing with the really tense events of the previous chapter. And they also set up the tense events that will follow in a later chapter. And that's what I feel this episode of Swamp Thing was. After the assassination attempt on Avery in last episode in the swamp, which was a lot more action-packed and intense, this follow-up is a more slower paced, aftermath where characters deal with that. And there are things going on between characters, story beats moving along to set things up for next episode's probably more action-packed episode. This one was a little bit slower paced, but I understand that that's a necessity in a TV show. It can't be like boom, boom, boom action all the way through, or else it becomes repetitive and silly. So I think this is kind of more of a setup kind of episode. Good for what it is, not as intense and as exciting as last week's episode or other ones prior, but there's a need for that. There's got to be a slowdown. You got to vary the speeds up in the rhythm of a TV show of this type. So that's my assessment of this episode. Overall, it's slower, but it's a necessary slowness, if that makes any sense to you. And we saw, this is a very, I felt, Avery Sunderland focused episode, as last episode's was. I mean, he is a major character on the show, the way they built him up as kind of like a puppet master, or at least someone whose actions influence everyone in the show. And this episode, I think, definitely did focus on his character a lot. To show him, he already was a three-dimensional character to begin with on the show, but I think they heightened that. Like, they're not trying to make him out to be a pure villain. He is very, he is very bad and he likes to manipulate. But I think that when he was in the swamp hallucinating or whatever, and he was talking to him, I think when he first thought he was talking to the sheriff, telling her, oh, I loved you and I wish you would have let me, get to know my son or whatever. I mean, it might have just been him trying, because he thought she was going to shoot him again, so he may have been trying to mess with her head to, save his own life, like he did in last week's episode when Matt was about to shoot him. But I think he did mean at least a little bit of what he was saying. I think he was at least somewhat sincere. And how initially, when he actually encountered Swamp Thing Alec Holland himself, Alec Holland basically rescued him. So the Swamp Thing rescued him and took him back to the cabin and, put those plants on his wound, on Avery's wound, to make him better. Later on, Avery was saying to Jason, he saved my life. I mean, I think he actually was at least a little bit concerned about curing Alec, at least initially, until Jason convinced him, no, it's better to leave him the way he is. Like, he could be harnessed for things, for cures to diseases and make you rich. So he eventually did go to the evil side again. And at the end of the episode, they totally tried to manipulate Alec in the Swamp Thing to come back with them willingly. But when he resisted, then that's when they were like, we got to call off the troops and force him to come with us. So I'm not saying that Avery is no longer a bad person, but I think the show is trying to give him layers. He already had them before, even before this episode. I didn't think Avery was this one-note cartoon character kind of villain at all. He was three-dimensional, but this episode, I think, really emphasized that a bit more. And I think that's good. And overall, we did see, I think that was pretty much the main thrust of this episode, was Avery, and then, him and Jason teaming up to, try to manipulate or, capture Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing got some interesting moments too. I like seeing Swamp Thing talk and be a bit more of an active presence in the show, as I said before. It was nice to see the scene where he was talking to Avery in the cabin or the shed after he brought him back. I like that interaction. I would like to see Swamp Thing doing more of speaking to people on his show and not just showing up to do action scenes and then you never see him again throughout the episode. So that was good. Another highlight was we got to see Adrienne Barbeau show up. And those of you who are fans of classic Swamp Thing live action appearances, you know exactly why that's special. She was in an old Swamp Thing movie, I think more than one. And, seeing her show up, it's like when you do these remakes or reboots of older franchises or just concepts that have gone on for years, it's nice to see older actors or actors from the original stuff show up in the new rebooted show or movie or whatever. And so Adrienne Barbeau showing up as Dr. Polymer, right? Or Polymer? How do you say her name? I think it's Polymer. That was cool. Although she didn't really do much in this episode, so I'm wondering if she'll be more, her character will be beefed up more in later episodes. Only 2 episodes left. But it was nice. Like, she was just there as a hospital administrator to give Abby a hard time. And then poof, she's gone. So, you know, I wonder if there will be more things up with her as things progress. Or if she just, you know, basically had a walk-on role, you know, like film for a day and then go home to make the fans happy. We'll see, I guess, in the 2 episodes left of this season and this entire show. And speaking of things that are established that we'll never get to see more of, even if they wanted to do more with it, in this episode when Matt talks to his mother, the sheriff, Lucilia, he mentions to her, you know, what about my father? And he's talking about the father who raised him, not his biological father, Avery, but the man who took care of him, whom he thought was his father at first. And it's interesting that they mention that character because, you know, Matt's, father who raised him has never been mentioned or referred to or showed up in the show yet, I think. So I don't see a point in the writers having him being mentioned unless they had planned for that man to show up as a character in later seasons of the show, right? They're setting things up at the end of the first season to, you know, have things play out in later seasons. Unfortunately, Swamp Thing's not going to get more seasons, so we'll never see, you know, that man who raised Matt, you know, the father who took care of him, show up to add more drama between Matt and the sheriff and Avery, you know, Matt's biological father. I'll bet you that they were going to try to set up some family drama to play out in future seasons, but since they aren't getting future seasons, that's not going to play out. Just as, you know, if Adrienne Barbeau's character is going to be more important, you know, she probably would have more to do in later seasons, but again, those seasons are not going to happen, unfortunately. So there we have it. My review of this episode, I think, might be relatively short, but I think this is kind of straightforward. I mean, I think it was a good episode, but I don't think there was much more to say about it than what we just did. I mean, it was, you know, a setup episode to bridge the gap between last week's intense episode and probably a more intense episode, which will follow next week. Because the next week is the penultimate episode, and then after that is the season finale, the season finale. So there's probably going to be a lot of action and interesting stuff happening. And so they have to have a slow period, the calm before the storm. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like it on YouTube and subscribe to the channel because I appreciate your viewership, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.